Have you ever scrolled on social media and felt like everyone else's relationship is just better? Like they have it all figured out with beautiful getaways and romantic date nights while your relationship is struggling to get through all of these really deep challenges. Well, you're actually not alone. Our brains are wired to compare. But when it comes to relationships, those comparisons can be really misleading. So in this video, we're going to deep dive into the psychology of why we can't stop comparing our relationships to others, why it's so damaging, and what we can do about it. So picture this, you're having a rough patch with your partner. Maybe you've been arguing more than usual or feeling a bit disconnected. And then you open up Instagram or whatever, and you see your friend posting about their amazing date night, or your cousin gushing about meeting their soulmate. There's a proposal. Suddenly your relationship seems pretty lackluster in comparison. Now this is a totally normal thing to feel, but the thing is, constantly sizing up our relationships against others can actually really take a toll. It can chip away at our self-esteem and it can leave us feeling really dissatisfied, even if there's no real basis for that comparison. So why do we keep doing it? What's the psychology at play here? And most importantly, how can we break free from this comparison trap? So there is actually quite solid psychology of why we can't seem to quit comparing our relationship to others. So there's something called the social comparison theory. And this is the idea that we size ourselves, our experiences, and our romantic relationships against other people to figure out whereabouts in the hierarchy of society we stand. So we actually make two types of comparisons. We compare upwards and we compare downwards. So upwards comparisons usually happen when we compare ourselves to someone who seems to be doing better than us. Maybe they have a more intimate connection with their partner, or they're going on these extravagant, super romantic, exciting dates. These upward comparisons can leave us feeling really deflated if that relationship that we're comparing to seems just way out of our league. But on this flip side, there's downward comparisons, which happen when we look to couples who appear to be struggling more than us. So we might think, well, at least we're not fighting as much as them. The thing with these comparisons is that we can interpret them in many different ways. They can give us a temporary self-esteem boost, or they can give us a really deflated sense of self-esteem because we feel like we should be in the upward positions. And the problem is that they become really unproductive because instead of working on and focusing on our own relationship, we're actually just relying on comparisons to feel either better or worse about ours. So why are our minds so prone to these comparisons? Well, our brains are naturally wired to size ourselves up against people we perceive as similar to us. We kind of give ourselves this mental league of who's fair game for comparison. The problem is that social media has totally skewed our sense of what's realistic. Think about it. When we scroll through our feeds, we're seeing everyone's highlight reel. It's the best moments, the perfectly curated and filtered romantic dates. But somehow our brains trick us into thinking that these people are in our league, you know, that we should be going on extravagant trips or we should be going to multi-$1,000 a head restaurants. And this even happens with friends. You know, if you sit there with friends at a restaurant, couple friends or whatever it is, and you see them acting happy and they seem totally in love. Again, this is a curated version of themselves because they're out in social situations. So they don't want to have arguments. They don't want to have conflict. We see everyone's curated version. So it's no wonder that we feel like our relationship is falling short. We compare our behind the scenes to everyone else's polished final cut. We're basing our comparisons on this illusion of perfection that doesn't really exist. And the more that we're exposed to these edited versions of relationships, the more skewed our own perception becomes. It can feel like there shouldn't be any conflict in our relationships. There shouldn't be any discord. There shouldn't be any crossed words. And it can start to feel like everyone else has cracked the code of this relationship bliss while we're still stumbling around trying to figure it out. But here's the thing, comparing our relationship to others is a game that we will never win. We're always going to come up short because the basis for comparison is fundamentally flawed. So why do we keep on playing this losing game? What is it about the comparison trap that keeps us hooked, even when it leaves us feeling worse about our own relationships? And just before we jump in, if you do want more videos like this, then feel free to subscribe to the channel for new videos on relationships every single week. This is all down to our ego. Our ego actually uses comparisons as a defense mechanism. When we're feeling down about our relationship, our ego kicks into high gear, tries to seek validation by comparing ourselves to others. If we're going through a tough time, our ego can start to look at other relationships that are doing better than ours, and we can start to think to ourselves, that's what it should be like. That should be like that all the time. So our ego compares our experience to others in order to validate it feeling bad. But here's the thing, our ego is really not a very fair judge. It's not critically selecting who to compare ourselves to. It just makes these choices based on its own subconscious calculations, and they're not always rational. So we can find ourselves comparing our relationship to a friend who seems to have it all together, but in reality, we're only seeing this tiny slice of their story. And the thing is that our comparisons are rarely one-to-one. We're not just comparing our entire relationship to somebody else's. Instead, we're often cherry picking the best aspects of multiple people's relationships and then stacking them up against our own. So our minds kind of create this imaginary perfect relationship in our mind, pieced together from everyone else's highlight reels, and then compares our current relationship to that. And that can leave us really deflated, feeling like our relationship has no hope. So for example, we might be envying our coworker's thoughtful partner while also wishing that we had the adventurous spark of our buddy's new fling. And then we try to measure ourselves up to this fictional amalgamation of everybody else's highlight reel. It becomes a losing battle. So it's important to understand the ego, to understand this pattern. So our ego is kind of like our sense of self-identity, and it creates a lot of thoughts to justify its own existence. The ego's whole job is to make comparisons as a way to define itself. So the more our ego is running the show, the more likely we are to get caught up in its cycle of sizing ourselves up against others. And the problem is that in today's social media saturated world, our egos are in overdrive. We're constantly bombarded with images and stories and videos that seem to show everyone else living their best lives, relationships included. But when we really take a step back to look at what's really happening, we can start to see how flawed this whole process is. By stepping back from looking at all of these comparisons and actually focusing on our relationship, then it's easier to become more present on how to overcome the challenges that we have in our relationship now, rather than wishing we were in this amalgamation of 17 different people's relationships. So what can we do about it? How can we break free from this comparison trap and actually take the right actions on our relationship? Well, the first step is understanding the function of these comparisons. When we can recognize that they are often driven by our own insecurities and negative emotions, we can start to take back some control. But I understand that this is easier said than done. Our minds are pretty good at convincing us that these comparisons are totally valid. And that's where learning to process and accept these negative thoughts come in. When we can sit with our relationship anxieties and frustrations, rather than letting our ego run wild with these comparisons, we can start to chip away at the power that they hold over us. It can be very easy to get caught up with these thought patterns. When we feel worry about our relationship, our ego can create these thoughts that things should be in a different way and that we should give up on the relationship because we're never going to be as successful a couple as this other couple that we're looking at. The ego can create these thought patterns that distract us from taking action on our relationship and taking responsibility for what we do in our relationship, right? So it can leave us with all these anxieties and worries about the future, about what's going to happen to our relationship? Our relationship is never going to be as good as this couple that I saw on Instagram or this couple that I saw on YouTube. My partner did this to me. We start to build resentment of all these things, and relationships shouldn't be like this, and this isn't love. Or we can blame ourselves for problems in the relationship, and we can start to ruminate over these thoughts of feeling guilty for the bad things that we've done, and that can also distract us from taking action on our relationship now. So it's important to recognize these illusions that are created by our ego so that we can actually pay attention to the now, which is when we can actually take action and do something about creating that relationship that we are looking to have. And this is a developed skill. This takes time and practice in order to recognize these patterns so that we can bring ourselves back to the present and focus on what is important in our relationship. Okay, so we've seen how the comparison trap works and why it's so hard to escape. Is that there are some concrete steps that we can take to start breaking free from this cycle. It's not always easy to sit with these uncomfortable feelings of inadequacy or frustration, but learning to process them and accept them is key. Once we accept that we are feeling them, then the next steps are, what can we do about it? How can we take action on the things that are making us feel insecure? This is the crucial way to start moving forward in your relationship. Now, I know you're probably thinking that this is easier said than done. Trust me, I get it. But this is the work that turns your relationship around. And this is part of the tools and strategies that I work on with my Ultra Normal members. If you do want to join us, then sign up for the free relationship bootcamp, where you'll learn the tools and skills to turn your relationship into a thriving relationship like you see on social media. Click on the link in the description to get started today. And this constant comparison can leave us feeling like we are somehow incompatible with our partner. The problem is that the idea of relationship compatibility actually holds us back from crafting the relationships that we want to be in. It can prevent us from doing the right things in order to cultivate the relationship that we want. And I actually made a video on the live relationship compatibility, which I will leave you with right here. I'll see you over there.